It was a cold November evening when Sarah and David Thompson, a young couple looking for a fresh start, arrived at the small house they had just bought in Amityville, New York. The charming Victorian home, with its gabled roof and white facade, seemed like the perfect place to begin their new life together. Little did they know, their dream home would soon become a nightmare. The couple had heard about the house's grim past, the notorious DeFeo murders of 1974, where Ronald DeFeo Jr. killed his entire family. However, they were determined not to let the dark history overshadow their new beginning. They moved in and began settling into their new home, trying to put the past behind them. The first few nights were quiet, but an unsettling feeling lingered in the corners of the house. Sarah often felt as though she was being watched, and David would sometimes hear faint whispers while working late into the night. They attributed these sensations to the house settling and their own nerves about the new environment. One particularly cold and foggy night, Sarah woke up feeling unusually uneasy. She glanced at the clock, 3:15 a.m. As she turned to her side, she noticed a strange, cold draft coming from the hallway. The old grandfather clock in the living room chimed, but the sound was oddly distorted, echoing with a mournful tone that made her shiver. She decided to investigate, pulling on a robe and stepping into the hallway. The house was silent except for the occasional creak of the floorboards beneath her feet. As she approached the living room, she noticed the heavy, antique drapes moving slightly, even though the windows were tightly closed. Suddenly, Sarah heard a soft, almost imperceptible crying sound coming from the basement. It was a child's cry, desperate and forlorn. Her heart raced, but curiosity got the better of her. She hesitated only briefly before descending the creaky stairs into the darkness of the basement. The basement was damp and musty, with the faint smell of mildew. Sarah fumbled for the light switch, and when the dim bulb flickered on, she saw nothing unusual, just old storage boxes and cobwebs. The crying seemed to have stopped, but a sense of dread hung heavily in the air. As she turned to leave, she noticed something odd about the corner of the basement. There was an old trunk, covered in dust and cobwebs. It seemed out of place. Sarah approached it, her hands trembling as she lifted the lid. Inside, she found old photographs, some of which were eerily familiar. They were pictures of the DeFeo family, the same faces she had seen in news reports about the murders. Suddenly, the temperature in the basement dropped, and the lights flickered violently. Sarah felt a chilling breath on her neck and turned to see a shadowy figure standing behind her. The figure was a man, his face twisted in an expression of anguish and rage. His eyes were hollow, and his mouth moved silently as if trying to speak but no words came out. Sarah screamed, stumbling back as the figure advanced toward her. The trunk slammed shut on its own, and the lights went out completely, plunging the basement into darkness. Panic-stricken, Sarah scrambled up the stairs, her heart pounding. She could hear the shadowy figure following her, its footsteps echoing ominously in the darkness. When she reached the main floor, she saw that the house had changed. The walls seemed to warp and stretch, and the once familiar rooms now felt alien and menacing. David was awake now, having heard her screams. He rushed to her, his face pale with concern. "What happened?" he asked, his voice trembling. I saw something in the basement," Sarah stammered. "A figure, it was trying to hurt me." David took Sarah's hand, and they decided to leave the house immediately. They grabbed their essentials and rushed outside, not even bothering to lock the doors. The fog outside was thick, and the night was eerily silent, as if the house had swallowed all sound. They drove to a nearby hotel, where they spent a restless night. The following morning, they returned to the house, hoping that it had all been a bad dream. But the moment they stepped inside, they knew something was terribly wrong. The atmosphere was heavy, and the feeling of dread was even more palpable. They decided to contact a local historian who knew about the house's dark history. The historian revealed that the house had a history of tormenting its inhabitants, a legacy of the tragic events that had occurred there. The spirits of the DeFeo family were said to haunt the house, their anguished souls trapped in a cycle of suffering. Desperate for help, Sarah and David arranged for a paranormal investigation and a cleansing ritual to be performed. The investigators documented various paranormal occurrences, including cold spots, unexplained noises, and the presence of shadowy figures. The cleansing ritual involved burning sage, chanting protective prayers, and blessing each room. After the ritual, the haunting activity in the house subsided, but the experience left a lasting impact on Sarah and David. They decided to sell the house and move far away from Amityville, unable to shake the terror that had consumed their lives. The house, now vacant once again, remains a chilling reminder of its dark past. Visitors and passers-by still speak of the eerie feeling that lingers around it, and the legend of the Amityville Horror endures as one of the most terrifying stories of paranormal activity in American history.